Let's see, do you want a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
Why don't you get him a cup of coffee? Something while we're talking here.
Sip something.
And that would,
You want a cup of coffee too?
yeah. Is the coffee hot or is it cold over there?
No, I think it's hot.
It's hot, but it'll be...
Okay, that's good. That's all we need. So, while we're getting our coffee, I mean, what we'll just want to talk about a bit is about Jonas Lundgren and, you know, how you remember, especially how you remember him in the end of his life, and particularly maybe what happened when he was going to die, when he died that time. So,
I remember him when I first was old enough to remember anybody. Why, he had lost his wife already, you know. And he had big handlebars, let me tell you. Real big ones. And then it seemed like he wore a beard for a while too, and then he shaved it all off, and boy, I remember it sure made him look funny. I thought anyway.
Yeah.
He looked funny. But
yeah.
you want to know about the day he died, or?
Yeah. What do you remember about the day he died, I guess, would be
Yeah, well,
interesting.
Jelmer was moving, you know, and it was a lot of snow on the ground, and everybody was pushing everybody because everybody was getting stuck.
What kind of time of the year was this?
Well, it would be March 1st.
March 1st, okay.
Yeah, and about March 1st anyway. That was moving day usually. And we come home, and I was chopping wood for the old wood stove, you know, or the stove, you know, the heating stove. And Dad and the rest of the boys were doing chores, and Mom was in the house with Grandpa. I don't know why he didn't come out, because he always fed the pigs and watered the pigs. That was always his job, but he didn't do that night. And pretty soon Ma come out, waving her hands, and everybody come in, 'cause Grandpa's dying. And there he was laying there on the floor, you know, gasping his last breaths.
Had he had heart condition?
Not,
Did anybody know?
No, just stroke. You know, he'd had, I think he had a light stroke or something like that before. And
Okay.
those days, you know, in the 30s, when doctors weren't like they are now. You know, but they did warn him, you know, to not to work real hard, you know, and stuff like that. But
How old was he?
I think he was something like 67, something like that. He wasn't real old. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So he overexerted doing pushing out
Well,
somebody, and
that's what we kind of thought, you know. But
that was
who
at
knows?
least the time
Yeah.
or after that.
Who knows what it was? Maybe
What-
it was just his time to go. You know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, that. And you were there to see that? You were.
Yeah. Yeah. And the rest of the boys, I'm sure, was too. I'm sure. Dad. Yeah.
And he was. He outlived his wife, right?
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah. By quite a ways.
yeah.
By. How old would I be? Grandpa. Knudson, you know, he passed away in 1936.
Oh, okay.
So Grandpa Lundgren, I think, must have passed away a little bit later than that.
Okay.
I think that's the way it was. Because 1936 was a bad year for winter.
Yeah.
One blizzard, you know,
After the other.
after another.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's what I wanted to hear you tell about, because I didn't
Yeah.
think we had any other record of memories about
Grandpa
that.
Lundgren was always a guy, you know, he loved kids.
Yeah.
He'd always play horse with us boys, you know, on his knee, you know, and yumpa yig. I can remember that.
Yumpa Yiga, he
Oh
said?
yeah, yumpa yig. He'd say, yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, he had that old Swedish brogue, you know,
Yeah.
Kanuva, that was Canova, you know, that was Kanuva. I can remember that.
Very, very strong, thick
he-
accent.
Yeah. He fixed harnesses, you know, in the winter time, you know, drug them in the house and worked on them. And made us boys a sled out of lumber, you know. And did little things like that, you know. He was kind of a handyman.
Yeah.
Is he the one that did the waxing of the?
Oh yeah, linen. I think it was linen threads. Yeah.
Okay.
Then he had the two big long needles, and then he had an awl, you know, awl I guess they call them, you know, to make the holes with. And he'd make the holes, and then he'd put the two needles in the same hole, you know, and then drop tight. And when it was fixed good.
Yeah.
Well, you were always telling them about this, do you think both your grandfathers, the saddest time of their lives was because they lost their
Well,
parents
I
during
think
the
so.
30s
They
and
both
had to live with their children. And
come
that
from the old
really-
country, you know, with big hopes and high hopes, you know, and they both lost their farms, you know, in the early 30s. I don't know about
Then had to live with
Grandpa
their children.
Knudson. I don't know if he lost his farm or just was badly bent. I don't know.
I thought they said last night he never bought a farm.
Oh yeah, yeah. He had a
Andrew's the
farm.
one that never bought the farm.
Yeah, my dad. My dad later on, he did buy a quarter of land, but you know, he seen both of his father-in-laws, you know, buy a land and then go broke. And he was scared.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of brings me to you with when you started up farming, because I know the first farm that we were on that I was born, or you know, the one where you were living when I was very little was a rented
Yeah.
place, and then you ended up buying the land that you know, that I remember as our home, basically. Can you tell me a little about what was going on as far as what how that happened that you bought
Well,
land there?
that land was owned by insurance company. I don't remember which one. One of them was Metropolitan Life. I know they had a lot of land, and I suppose a lot of the insurance companies did. And that quarter was up for sale, and so it was either buy that one or move.
That's
Well-
where you were living on.
Yeah, the first house, or the first place, you know. The land was good, you know, but the buildings were terrible. Just a little old house and a little old barn, and I don't know if it had a granary on it or not. I suppose it did. So we bought, you know, the home place there from a loan company too. And paid $55 an acre, $58 an acre.
And what year approximately was that? Was that in 46 or 8?
47, I think.
47.
Yeah. Janet was born in 48. She was born there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I did a lot of wrong things in my life. I guess everybody does. Yeah.
What are you referring to?
Well, farm-wise especially, you know. I was a farmer by heart, you know, in my heart, you know.
Yeah.
And the way I went at it, why it just didn't pay. Where, Cliff Hodney, he was a guy too. He was half broke when he bought his farm too. But he went ahead and plunged in and built it up, and he bought down in the valley, you know, a lot of range land cheap. Had a lot of cattle, but he got a lot of land too, you know. I think it was 4 quarters in that big bunch. In those days, the loan companies or the insurance companies wanted their farms to sell. So it was a buyer's market, you know.
But you didn't make that kind of risk.
I didn't, no. But now, looking back, that's not the way it should have went.
If you would have taken more risks at
Yeah,
that time, it
sure.
might have turned out more
Yeah.
productive for you. Yeah. Well, you raised us all on basically a quarter of land and a 80 acres, I think, right? With
Well, for the first few years,
yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Mhm.
That wasn't much.
No, it wasn't enough.
I've always
Well-
marveled that you did that. I mean, that it
Yeah.
was, we lived and ate
Yeah.
during those periods of
That's
time.
about it.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
I never thought of us as poor.
I didn't either.
No.
Yeah. But that's the way it went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was tough decisions. But it feels like part of what if I'm getting a picture of our family history a little bit, was that, you know, you had the grandparents that lost everything in their dirty 30s, and that shook the confidence of Andrew particularly.
Yeah.
And might have had some impact on you
Oh,
too.
sure it did, sure, absolutely. That part, I can still hear Grandma, you know, crying, you know, and she thought she was being shoved around, you know, but the kids always, you know, they'd get together and one would say, well, now we've had Grandma now for a month, now it's your turn. You know, and Grandma thought, you know, that they didn't want her. And then she'd cry, you know, and she'd say, they don't want me anymore, you know, and then she felt sorry for herself, you know, well, that's the way life was
And
then.
that impacted you.
Sure,
that
a lot
really-
of that did, sure.
What did you do with those feelings about that? Do you know
Well,
what you...
we thought it was just the way life was, I guess, I don't know. There was no feelings there, it just, that's the way it was.
Kind of nothing you could do to change
No.
anything.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Geez.
And Dad's dad, you know, he had diabetes, you know, real bad. And those days they couldn't do a whole lot with it, you know. Then he had a sore on the one leg, and the doctor said, well, either you're going to die or else we'll take the leg off. Which do you want to do? And he says, I'd rather die with both my legs. So
Yeah.
that's the way he died too.
Yeah.
That was at Almus and Wally's, I think is where he was staying then. Or they were staying, both
Sure.
of them were staying there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So there was kind of a cruel
Oh,
life with not much resources.
you bet, yeah. The dirty 30s, no crops and no money.
Yeah.
And then those old people.
Who had even
Nothing.
less.
Yeah, who had even less.
I think it put a big fear in you though because of
Well,
what
sure.
the future holds, if you're gonna have to live with kids or in a nursing home or
Well,
something,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah, so you look at
Yeah.
today and think of, oh my God, if I had to live with my kids, I would never want to repeat what my
Yeah,
grandmother
yeah,
experienced.
That's about it. Yeah.
Makes
And
sense.
then they come along with Social Security, you know, the farmers didn't get it right away. But they eventually got it too. And, you know, these guys that cuss and swear and say this going broke, they better wake up and do something about it.
Yeah.
That's all I can say, 'cause
It-
the other way is not good. I'll tell you that.
You know the pain and suffering of that one.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it
So I don't know what else to say about that.
yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good statement of it.
Grandma Knudson, you know, she burnt to death, you know. You knew that, you know.
Yeah, that was another tragedy.
Yeah.
So the scenario of these, of my great-grandparents now,
Yeah.
your grandparents, is that one dies of diabetes and
Yeah.
a leg that's needing amputation, and
Yeah.
he'd rather die than to be without the leg, and it was a
Yeah.
pretty brutal medical
Decision.
situation. And then let's see, I got that's
Well,
your
that's Ann.
and then
That's
Canute's wife is the one that
Yeah.
that died of the
Yeah.
fire.
Fire. Yeah.
So she died a very painful,
Miserable.
very tragic death. And then Canute is the one that died of the diabetes.
Say, another thing too that I thought of, you know, I don't know, it was a Lutheran church, you know, that they belonged to, but I can remember it being a real small guy, and they had a kind of a revival meeting down there at their church, you know, and Dad and Ma went down there. And they had a couple of preachers, I think up front, if I remember. I was just a little squirt of a kid anyway. And during the service, they had this preacher would call on people, you know, for testimonies. And Grandpa Knudson, of course, he got up, you know, and gave his testimony, and saying what a sinner, you know, that he was, you know, and what a bad man he was, you know, and he just run himself down, you know, and crying like a baby, tears running down his cheeks, you know. And that was in a Lutheran church.
That was over at St. Peter's?
Yeah, at St. Peter's, the old church.
Yeah.
Yep.
What impact did that have on you? What feelings did you have about that?
Not good. That was not my way of thinking at all. You know, because he was a guy that wouldn't hurt a fly.
So you didn't see him as that bad
No.
person
He wasn't
standing.
either. No, he was just the kindest man there was.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. Kind of quiet spoken, you know, he wouldn't say a whole lot, you know. Oh, he'd talk too, but he really had a Norwegian brogue. He was worse than Jonas, you know. Yeah. He yog.
So I'm thinking now of the circumstances of these people. Canute has a religion that's pretty self-defacing,
Yeah.
it sounds like,
Yeah.
running himself down, talking about what a terrible sinner he is, that
Saying
kind of religious...
What a terrible man he was, and maybe he felt that way too, I don't know.
He could have, so low self-esteem could have been a part of his life somehow.
Well, it's possible, I suppose.
And when you lose your place of livelihood and you're dependent on your children, you probably don't feel real...
Well, I'm sure that must have had a terrible thing, you know, to happen to them.
Yeah.
You know, they had, you know, because Grandpa Knudson especially, he always talked about going back to Norway once, you know, before he died. But he never got there.
So an unfulfilled dream, really.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I'm forgetting as I'm sitting here about now. That was then the other side. Grandma's mother then dies of this breast cancer in that god awful way that the medical profession dealt with breast cancer those days. Very, I mean, just traumatic to Louise and to Ida and all the others probably. That is how that happened. And then Jonas then dies. Probably the most peaceful of anybody, if you want to say.
He just keeled over.
He died on his feet, kind of.
That's what he did.
Like the others.
Yeah.
So he had a kind of a breast cancer deforming kind of end for
Jonas. You know, he was a guy too that had pride. You know, he felt pride. You know, and then to be penniless, I'm sure that hurt him, because he was a guy that felt like he was somebody, you know.
He'd had it better maybe than
Well,
at one point.
whether he did or didn't, you know, he was just a more proud guy, you know.
Right.
And the other grandpa, you know, he was such a timid, mellow sort of a fella, you know.
Yeah.
So there was that difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think that there's a lot of impact on all of us when we look back on our roots of the history of our family,
Yeah.
and I know that just hearing those stories now for me, having had my own depression, you know, and my own reasons, you know, for it, but I can see the huge losses that occurred.
Yeah. And Kenny, you know, was talking about Bill's dad, you know, John Knudson. See,
Okay.
they lived just across the way from Knut, you know.
Yeah.
And I think they were half brothers. That's what I always heard
I think so.
and
Yeah.
understood. So Bill wouldn't really be he's something like a half cousin or whatever you'd call it, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Somehow, I don't
Yeah.
know what the.
I don't know. either.
We'd have to look at the family tree and
Yeah,
get that
I
straight.
don't know either. So I guess that's the way that was.
Yeah. So was talking about the religion part of Knut's, you know, what you remembered on him.
Yeah.
Jonas, what kind of relationship to religion did he seem to have that you could tell? What was he very religious? Was he sort of nominally religious,
Well,
or how would you look at him as today?
He was religious, you know. He always went to church, always wanted to go to church, you know. But it seemed like the old Augustana church, you know, wasn't like this old Norwegian church. I don't know, it was different.
They didn't have they didn't go up for the testimonies
No,
and
not for the
all.
testimonies and that sort of thing. But,
Right.
but I remember Ma too, you know, boy, she was religious, I'll tell you.
Ida.
Ida and Andrew too, Dad too.
But Ida being the Swede.
Yeah, but I don't know.
Yeah, but it was different, and there was more
Yeah.
more sort of self importance, or like he
Well,
was.
Yeah.
He didn't run himself down so much.
No, no, I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just a difference, I suppose, the way they were brought up, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think it was.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I sense there was a strong piety in Ida. I mean, her religion and reading
Oh,
the
yeah.
Bible and all
Oh,
of
yeah.
that. At least in the later years that I know
Yeah.
of her, she was very
Yeah.
much
She was kind of the leader.
the leader of the family
Yeah.
on the religion.
Yeah.
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 I remember Andrew, toward the end of his life, I was riding in the pickup with him someplace,
Mm.
and we were talking, and he was commenting about Terry and I having gone into the ministry.
Oh.
And he made a comment that I'll never forget. I remember him saying, well, you know, Donnie, he'd say, I don't, I really wasn't, you know, as good at religion as I probably should have been. I mean, he had a little bit of
Yeah.
kind of like maybe he didn't live up to something or another. I don't know.
Well,
But I don't know if he ever expressed that normally or not.
during the last years of their life, I know we'd go down there for a visit, you know, once in a while. And at night, Ma would read. I don't know.
Out of the Old Testament.
How was
and
that?
He'd read out of the New,
Yeah,
and
I
they
think
each
so.
read to each other out loud.
Yeah, one chapter apiece,
Mhm.
I think.
Mm.
Yeah.
Neat.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, I always saw him as pretty, I
Yeah.
mean, and Andrew was the one that remodeled the whole parsonage over there at Center. He was head of the crew, I think,
Well,
when they redid
Him
that.
and Marvin Johnson's father, whatever his name was.
Yeah, those old two old guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Andrew and yeah. Well, anyway, I think
Yep.
of that.
I can't remember what his name was. Marvin Johnson's dad, Emil Johnson.
That's right, Andrew Knudson and Emil Johnson.
Emil, he was a carpenter though by trade almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, he knew what he was doing.
But Andrew really did like carpentry work too. It seemed
Yeah,
like.
he did a lot of that too.
Yeah, I was always amazed at
Yeah.
that. He kind of was handy with the saw and the
Oh, yeah.
hammer and
Yeah.
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 Well, I don't know. It it's just we could maybe talk a little more about maybe more. You talked about buying that farm that we did there north by Winfred. Did you ever sit back and regret? You said you had some regrets. Did you ever
Well,
think about what if I should have done something or another?
Well, sure. This same guy, I can't remember what he was. He was a retired, let's see, what did he do? Run an elevator in Salem or something. Anyway, he was retired, but he was selling farms just to make a little money on the side, He was retired already. And I used to know his name too, and I used to know the guy. He come driving out there one day and he says, "Hey, Clarence, I got a couple of farms I want to show you." I had no idea I was going to buy a farm either. And so he showed me that one, that we used to live on. But that was the last farm he showed us. He showed us several other farms, and there was one north of there, probably mile west or something like that, and then probably 3 or 4 miles north. And that was two quarters, real flat, good land, but there was jennies on it, just solid jennies. And that was before they knew about spraying. I suppose somebody knew about it, but I didn't. So I thought, boy, I don't want to have nothing to do with that farm, because it was just loaded with jennies. So I passed that up, but I think that was only $50 an acre for those 2 quarters. One right across the road,
Yeah.
from each other.
Knowing what you do now, that kind of, you wish you
Yeah.
would have done that
Why,
instead of,
sure, just
yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Because then in a year or two, they had spray to spray that stuff. So.
Yeah.
But, you look back and you say, well, I should have done that. But you
Yeah,
didn't.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
easy to do hindsight.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like you had to have worked awfully hard and put in a lot of long hours
Oh, yeah.
and eked out as much as you could out of what you had. I mean, that was what I remember. Seemed like you.
Yeah.
I know you
Well.
put us to work when we were getting older.
Oh, yeah. I know that. Drive the old B John Deere hauling corn or something.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I remember always wanting to get out there and
Yeah.
try some of them tractors.
Or the old
sometime.
A.
The old A.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Trading off the for the chores and stuff, keeping the tractor going.
Especially cultivating corn is when
Especially-
I told you, now you watch that slough, don't get too close. First round after dinner, I got stuck. Oh, man.
That really impressed you, yeah.
That really did.
Oh man.
Daryl Pearson was just across the fence working, and he seen me working, and he come walking over there, and he says, "Well, maybe I can help you." And of course, he put the log chain on, and both of us got mired down. So my darn tractor got down so deep that the cultivator was just buried in the mud. So you had to stand there and take the cultivator off piece by piece.
Oh,
Oh, in the mud.
Not a good day.
No. Probably spent a half day doing that.
Sure. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, at least.
Yeah.
Oh man.
That's what neighbors were for.
Yeah. You all help each other out. I think,
Yeah.
I think Leonard Lundgren I remember the most.
Oh yeah. That guy, he was a good old guy. Yeah. Come over there at noon when he'd walk out of the house and he'd have egg on his face, down his chin, so you knew what he had. Well, in the mornings, yeah, for
Uh-huh.
breakfast. He always liked his eggs for breakfast.
And he always liked his new baler.
Oh yeah, sure.
He was really,
Yeah,
he loved that new baler.
yeah. Yeah, those were the good old days. But the time that I recall the best though was one time I drove over there and he didn't see me coming in there, and he was working on his trailer, and he had the thing jacked up and he was washing out the bearings, you know, to put new grease in there. And there was some gasoline there on the ground, and happened to see a crack in the frame, so he got his welder out, you know, and he didn't see me coming. And he'd be welding there, you know, and pretty soon the gas would start burning under him. Pretty soon he'd run off and he'd put the old welder in there again, and I just stood back there and laughed at him, you know. And pretty soon he seen me laughing. He says, "My gosh," he says, "you would let me burn up, wouldn't you?" Oh man, that was funny. Oh, Leonard, he was quite a guy.
Yeah. Yeah, what a good-natured old guy.
Yeah, he was good-natured.
Yeah, and he always was good to us kids, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah, that was my memory too.
Yeah, he couldn't quite see what in the world was, you know, making his pants hot, you know.
Yeah, he could have got hurt a little bit there if it would have
Well,
taken off on him.
I wouldn't
Let that happen.
wouldn't have let that happen, but it was kind of funny. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah, those were the good old days, I guess. At least we call them that.
Well, they were memorable, that's for
Yeah.
sure. I know I won't ever forget them.
And I told you kids to go and get a education, you know, because there was no room there on the farm for you guys, that's for sure.
I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd say, yeah, there was no future in farming, you thought.
Well,
And I think that's a message that maybe was consistent with this history we've talked about with your grandparents and then your parents having never quite been able to buy land, and then you trying to but not really feeling confident to really go whole hog, you know.
yeah.
And then it really was clear as it went on that it was harder and harder to be in farming.
Well, you had to get at it at the right time, and you had to gamble.
Right.
Because right after the dirty 30s, you know, everybody was scared.
Yeah.
You know, money was scarce, and it didn't rain, and there was dust storms, and everybody was just had it, you know. But those people that really jumped in then, you know, the land was cheap, and mortgaged their life, you might say, to buy that land, you know, and by goodness, pretty soon the prices went up, and land prices went up too.
So there was those that made it okay.
They're the ones that made it okay. Sure.
We weren't really able, for whatever reasons, to make those kind of choices
No.
at those times, that take that kind of risk when
Yeah.
it turns out, as we look back, it worked out, yeah. So the motivation for education a lot was just the failure, really, of
Survival.
agriculture. Yeah, it was to survive,
Yeah.
to survive outside of that failed agricultural lifestyle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's probably why most, basically all of us in the Knudson clan are not in farming today.
There were a lot of my friends my age, you know, they went to the service, and then they come back, and they never come back home.
Yeah,
They'd settle in Arizona or California or Washington or someplace like that, and got in on the ground floor in all the development, you know, that went on, you know, and why, they were making it big.
So they were financially successful because
Yeah,
of all of that.
Sure,
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
and they were smart too.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Yep.
Lucky and smart.
Well,
Right place at the right time, and
maybe,
made some choices that were
yeah,
good.
maybe being more smart than lucky, you know.
But it was a boom time for the
Oh,
country.
sure it was,
Yeah.
sure.
So that was the land of opportunity time. Yeah. Well,
Yeah. Yep.
that's what I think of myself. Went off to college. I had the problem of the foot, you know, which was a physical thing, and I remember the doctor telling me I should get a desk job. I remember
Oh,
that
did he?
term. Yeah.
Did you really?
Yeah, and I remember that vividly. And then of course you were telling about the no economic future for farming, so you better go off and go do something else.
Yeah.
And the religious community was the place where I saw somebody doing something else.
Yeah. Sure.
And so that was part of how I chose to leave the farm. It's just that I ended up back in parishes that were farm related in a lot
Oh,
of
yeah,
cases, so
sure.
I
Yeah.
reconnected that way. But
Yeah.
I've always felt that unresolved part of me that was in the history of being tied to that land.
Oh.
But what I'm seeing now as I'm hearing this is really that the tie that we had to the land was really a tie that had a lot of fear in it, that we were
Well,
afraid
Yeah.
of doing something else or didn't know what else to do, and didn't really have couldn't really give ourselves totally to that land in terms of the debts and risks that you'd had to take way back in order to make it big.
Well, there was people, you know, like the Palmquist, for instance, and Laurel Anderson, and Gene Pearson, and Maynard Pearson,
Yeah.
and all those, you know, they really went at it the right way. You know, and their dads were good businessmen.
Yeah.
And that made a difference.
That's right.
Sure.
So, but that was the way it is.
Yep, that's the way it is.
And that's the way it is.
That's the way it is.
It's that on the New Evening News, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, I don't
Arvid,
go ahead.
Arvid Pearson, you know, he's one guy that I can talk about a little bit, you know. I think he got about $8,000 from Sweden. Some of his relatives, maybe his father died or something, left him $8,000 during the 30s. Rather than stick it in the bank and losing it, like a lot of people would have done, he went out and he bought, I know he bought land, and I think he bought cattle too, the way I kind of understand it. And man, you know, things just mushroomed, you know. And he was making money during the 30s even.
So he had a resource
Yeah, he had a little resource there.
and he risked it,
Yeah, sure.
and he got paid back by the
Yeah, I don't
circumstances.
know just all the details about that, but anyway, that's kind of the story I got.
And the majority of the people on the farms in South Dakota have lost their farms, and a very, very few have
Oh, yeah.
retained
Yeah.
being
Well,
on the farm.
nowadays, you know, I don't know, the poor farmers nowadays, I don't know how they can even make it.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Most everybody is left, except
Yeah.
for a very, very few.
Yeah, very, very few.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a big change in the whole of the country, and we've been a part of the history of that
Mhm.
change as we look back on that. And it's been about 100, well, it's 1996 now, so it's been, well, it's probably been a little over 100 years since some of that first got settled down there in terms of the farms being homesteaded and everything. Were they homesteaded in the 1880s, do you remember? Down there in around Salem?
I can't remember, but I suppose around 1880.
Yeah.
At least the towns were all founded about that time.
Established then, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably so, yeah. So it's been a little over 100 years, and
Grandpa Pearson, that'd be Henry's dad. homesteaded that farm, you know, that's north of Center Church. And I think Henry, he used to tell about his dad working in Sioux Falls all week when he first moved to, you know, the new country here. And he'd walk from Sioux Falls back to home, you know, and carry a sack of flour on his back.
Well,
That's what I've heard. You know, so those old guys, they worked.
That was hardship.
Yeah, just make both ends meet.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember stories like that.
Yeah.
Didn't remember the people, but
Yeah, that was Henry's dad.
and Henry was married to Aunt Louise, who was the youngest sister of
Yeah.
Ida.
Of
So
Moss.
that we have the connection here. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's on the corner of the Jonas Pearson farm that Center Lutheran Church got
Yeah.
built.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was part of that history too.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
And the first homestead, Henry says, was out in the pasture someplace.
On that quarter.
Yeah, there was a sod house out there, and there's a hole out there yet, he says, where you can see where there's been something going on there. But no, it's all gone.
It's all
you know.
gone, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, that's a lot of change when you think back.
They must have been clean houses. Packed dirt floor, dirt rooms, dirt walls. Boy,
Yeah. What a deal.
what a deal.
Yeah, you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And if it would rain 5 inches, why, it would melt your house, wouldn't it?
It could take
Sure
care
made
of
it
them.
muddy anyway.
A 5-incher could be a bad deal.
Yeah, it could.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah. Well, those old guys, they had guts, I'll tell you.
It must have taken a lot of courage to go out there
Oh, man.
and settle that
Yeah.
bare prairie like that.
Yeah.
Nobody was, but they must have had a lot of hope in themselves that there would be some better times.
I think so. Because, you know, those old Europeans, I don't care what nationality they were, you know, they moved here because they were starving over there.
So this was the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
I think they had a lot of faith too.
Well, yeah, but a lot of rough times, just like those Spirits. They wouldn't rent you no land to farm. They had to do it themselves, you know.
Yeah.
And the only story, you know, that they could give you was potato famine back in Ireland.
Yeah.
You know, the people putting her starved to death. Well, there was a lot of people did starve to death. And that's what, you know, the old folks, old John Ferrick
Yeah.
and his wife, that's what they'd seen.
That shaped them. I remember
Yeah.
stories about that. Maggie
They-
Ferrick, I remember the
Oh,
story
yeah.
about Maggie. She was still living, I think,
Yeah.
when I was
Oh,
a kid,
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and how she outlived all her brothers and ended up with all this money, but
All
no,
that land.
and land, and
Yeah.
but didn't live but lived mostly like just a poor pauper.
And one nephew.
And one nephew.
Yeah, just one boy got married out of that whole family and had one boy.
And they probably didn't want to trust.
Well, he turned out to be no good, you know, because he wasn't guided down the right path, you know. It was always, oh, you got to watch your money, you got to do this, you got to do that. And
Yeah.
Merle can tell you a lot more about that than I can, because Merle and him were pals.
They were good friends.
Yeah.
So that was an Irish family that settled not too far from y'all,
Yeah.
and they were really affected by that trauma of the Irish
yeah.
famine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
During the 30s, they had the money, you know, and I suppose they bought land during the 30s, I imagine. I don't know. But they had more land that they could manage themselves.
They were afraid to put. I bet they didn't want to put any money in the bank.
Well, there was stories about cream cans buried with money in them, and after everybody was dead, why, there was people in there shoveling in the backyard, you know, trying to find him. I don't think anybody found him. Yeah, that's a fact.
It was a legendary story going out there.
And you know, there was a row of corn cribs out there in their pasture. You know, when Uncle Sam, you know, found out about them. You know, they hadn't been paying income tax for a long, well, never.
So this
And-
Irish family
Yeah.
never paid income tax.
No. And Uncle Sam found out about it, and well, one of those bachelors, I can't remember what in the world their names were. Anyway, it says, over my dead body, are they going to get any money out? Are we going to shell that corn and give it to the government? And both those boys died in the meantime, and those corn cribs, every time you went by, every year you went by, they were a little shorter. And I think the whole works rotted away. Now that's a fact.
And the government probably never got anything out of it.
Not out of that. Nobody did.
Nobody did.
No. It just went to waste. Probably 20,000 bushels of corn.
So they didn't trust the government either
No,
at that point.
they didn't trust nobody. Yeah.
So that was a terrible impact on.
The Catholic Church got a lot of money out of them. You know,
Yeah.
they all died eventually, you know.
Yeah.
And the Catholic Church got a lot, and Maggie, of course, she gave away a lot of the land. You know, and then she had lots of friends too.
Yeah, I bet she got a lot of friends.
Yeah, she did.
You didn't think of becoming one of her real good
No.
friends at that time, did you?
No. No, I didn't. But
You didn't take advantage
that-
of people like that.
that was the truth, though. You know, you know, she did have friends then, and
Sure.
you know, she enjoyed herself.
Yep.
Sure, she had friends, but
Yeah,
that's the way it goes.
that's quite a story. Well, around were the Swedes and the Norwegians, and then there were the Irish. So there was that ethnic group, and that Zafarics were part of
Yeah.
that group. Was there any other? I see, were there some Germans around in that area too?
Well, it's a funny thing. When I was growing up, you know, now I think they're mixed pretty much. But when I was growing up, why the German Catholics, they were more or less all south of town,
Of
south
Salem.
of Salem,
Oh yeah.
and the German Lutherans were kind of northwest northwest of town, and the Swedes were kind of straight north, and then maybe a little east. And the Norwegians, they were kind of northeast, more east than north.
Yeah.
And the Irish, well, that's Montrossville, you know.
Yeah.
That's the Irish town.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that was how the ethnic settlements
yeah,
were.
yeah.
Yeah.
Montrose was Irish, and it was Presbyterian Irish, I think, and Catholic Irish both.
Ah, so Scotch Irish probably, because
Probably.
Presbyterian is usually
Yeah.
Scotch Irish.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
At least Protestant Irish, you know,
Yeah.
like the,
Northern Ireland.
oh, what in the world? One of them married one of my dad's cousins. They were auctioneers there in Montrose years and years ago. Can't remember what their names are either. And they had a boy that was killed. They were, you know how Montrose is, it's down in the valley, you know.
Yeah.
Got lots of hills. Well, this one boy was on a sled, you know, going downhill one time and got going too fast and hit a tree. And he killed himself. Odell's.
Oh, okay.
Odell's their names were.
And this was their son that died
Yeah.
like that?
Yeah.
And
That was way back in 40s or 50s.
and they were Irish then. Odell was Irish.
I think so.
Yeah. And
I
then,
think so.
and then, was it Grandpa's cousin that married, or?
Yeah, it would be Grandpa's cousin, I think. Well, it was a sister of Bill
Knudson.
Knudson.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Who
think.
married this Odell?
I think that's the way it was.
Okay. So that was kind of one of the early intermarriages.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Between the Norwegians and the Irish then.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of like with Ida and Andrew, and of course, I don't know, you probably don't remember any of that, obviously, you weren't born, but they certainly were a marriage of, between the Swede and the Norwegian community that.
They tell me that there was a time when the Swedes and the Norwegians wouldn't mix. That was not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Boy.
What sort of story do you remember about them telling? Do you have any?
I can't remember any real stories that way. The only thing I've heard that's, you know, in a joking way maybe from somebody
Yeah.
or something, you know.
Yeah.
Whether there's anything to that or not, I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think there was. From everything I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know, and I don't know if this rings any bells with you, but Terry, I remember telling stories. He used to tell stories about that Grandma and Grandpa were met because there was a little flat tire that Ida had there on the
Yeah.
Valley Road somewhere. Is that kind of mythological? Do you?
I've heard of that story too, kind of, but I don't remember who told it to me or.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also remember hearing the story, and I don't know if you can confirm or deny it, is that that somehow when they got married there was a kind of contract made between the two families that if they get married in the Norwegian church that the couple would join the Swedish church. Because usually, you know, you'd get married in the bride's church,
Yeah.
you know, but they apparently got married over at St. Peter's, what I understand.
You mean my mom
Yeah.
and dad?
Yeah.
I think they got married at Ma's place.
Oh, did they? Oh.
Yeah, Grandpa's place, I think. Because either Dad or Ma would tell about that horrible snowstorm they got that day. Everybody got there, but they couldn't get home that night
Okay.
because it was of a bad snowstorm.
So Andrew and Ida got married,
In a snowstorm, and the preacher and everybody had to stay overnight.
and that was at
At
Jonas Lundgren's place. Okay. Do you remember which preacher? Was it the Swedish preacher or the Norwegian preacher?
Well, I suppose the Swedish preacher,
So
I
you
suppose.
think it was a Swedish preacher?
Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting kind of contradiction to what I'd heard. So
That's the way I
yeah,
gather anyway.
we'll have to seek out the truth here on
Yeah.
that one. Find a marriage
I remember
certificate somewhere and see.
I
What
think
Yeah.
Grandma said that too, that they got married in their home and
I
then all
think
that big
so.
snowstorm came.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a snowstorm
Yeah,
anyway.
it was
Yeah.
a snowstorm on the
That
3rd of
sounds
March.
plausible.
Yeah.
And, yeah, huh,
And those days there wasn't any roads that were built up much, you know. Most roads were just paths.
kind of ruts,
Yeah, well, it's just a prairie path.
right.
Yeah. There was some roads that were kind of graded up a little bit, but there wasn't much gravel, I'll tell you that.
Yeah,
Almost
So-
all the roads were just dirt.
just dirt, mud, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever was there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you remember that even
Oh,
yourself?
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I remember going to Salem with Dad one time. It had rained, and he had a Model T, kind of a truck, kind of a little with a flatbed in the back or whatever, you know. And we went to Salem, and it was mud, I think, all the way to Salem, if I remember. I remember the mud was a flying back there. Now it's just a little kid, you know.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I think we probably killed the night here, so we can get to bed. We ought to quit. So
I've
you're done with
got
coffee,
my
and
coffee done now.
coffee is coffee is over. Then I think we better turn this off.
Yeah,
So
that's
thanks a
about it.
lot.
Yeah.
Good stories.
Yeah.
One thing always leads to another, and then you know,
I remember one time, you know, Dad had went to town to buy groceries. And it was during the day. A lot of times he'd just go during the day, you know. And of course the grocery stores would always bag up a little small sack of candy, you know, and throw in the egg case, you know, because that's where the groceries went. You'd sell eggs and cream and buy groceries with it as much as you could with the eggs and cream money. And here come a car down the road, and I knew it wasn't Dad, you know, but Kenny was just a little squirt, you know, about that high. He runs out to the road, candy, 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 and the car just drove right on by. And he stood there and looked. Candy, candy, candy.
Nobody gave him candy.
No. No, it wasn't Dad, it was somebody else. And the old mailman that we had, Cheapers, what was his name? We had him during 1936, you know, when it was so terribly much snow. And he had kind of a squeaky voice, I can still remember him. And he'd, every once in a while, you know, about once a week, he'd call Dad up and say, if you can get down to such and such a place, your mail is down there. Well, if he couldn't get up here, how could we get down there? You know. Yeah.
Pretty hard. No good roads going in anyway much.
No. No way to open them up either. That was 1936. And I remember in February sometime why one of the neighbors called up Dad and everybody else and said, we're going out opening roads today. Everybody grab a shovel. And of course I was out of grade school then, you know. So I was a shoveler too, you know. And I bet you we were 15, 20 men, you know. And shovels, snow to beat the band, and then somebody with a Model A or Model T with them high, narrow tires, you know, would make the first run through there. And if he got stuck, you know, there was enough guys there, you know, to push him out, backward, out. And then we'd shovel some more. And we opened up miles and miles of road that way.
Manpower.
Yeah, just manpower. Yeah.
Boy.
That was 1936.
No big road graders them days.
No, they didn't have maintainers like they got now. If there was a maintainer, it was tractor pulled.
Yeah.
And then you had somebody driving the tractor and a guy back on the platform running those wheels.
Yeah.
Lifting them and guiding it down the road, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now we'll quit.
What have you got the thing on yet?